Okay, we're live now.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Audit Committee Chair Nate Hathaway, and I would like to welcome you to the January 18th Audit Committee meeting. As a reminder, the Audit Committee was established with responsibilities to review internal audit reports, review with management and the external auditors the results of the financial statement audit, the annual one, report to City Council about committee activities, issues, and related recommendations as needed, and provide an open avenue of communication between internal audit, the external auditors, and City Council. All committee members and staff are participating virtually, and we appreciate your patience as we work through committee meetings a bit differently. We are streaming live on our virtual engagement hub, which is accessible through the virtual engagement hub link on the front page of the city website and also linked on the committee page. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone. So for all of you out there today, welcome. We'll get started with a roll call today. So I'll now go through and introduce all the committee members who are participating virtually. Please make sure to mute your microphone if you are not speaking, and then you may unmute your microphone when you have a question or would like to speak. And then please remember to mute your phone after you are done speaking. All right, so committee members, as I call your name, please say a quick hello. Secretary Andrew Emery.
Hello.
All right, Debbie Ebencheck.
Hello.
And Sandra Frempong.
Hey.
All right. All right, we're on to the committee agenda items. To help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud. Additionally, I ask that committee members raise their hand to speak, and I will call upon them. So our first item is the approval of the minutes from the August 24th, 2023 meeting. Are there any questions, comments, or changes that need to be made to these minutes?
In reviewing the material on our Google Drive, I didn't realize that someone from the city apparently had done these already, so you can just disregard the ones I sent out earlier.
No problem. All right. Any other feedback? All right. Well, then we got to do a vote on the matter. So when I call out your name, please say aye or nay. Secretary Emery?
Aye.
Debbie?
Aye.
And Sandra?
Aye.
All right. With that, the motion passes. So we can move on to the next item, which is the fiscal year 2023 audit wrap-up. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tony McDowell, Finance Director, and Becky Ogles, Assistant Finance Director.
All right. Well, thank you, Nate, and good afternoon, committee members. And I think Alicia has some slides that she's pulling up. Great being with you all this afternoon. So the first agenda item today, as you all know, at our last meeting with you all was a joint meeting between this committee and the Policy, Finance, and HR Committee of City Council, and we presented the 2023 fiscal year year-end audit. So we wanted to loop back with you all today to kind of wrap that up, and then near the end, Becky's going to talk to you all a little bit about fiscal year 2024 audit planning, which is already underway. So we can go to the next slide. So just the key takeaways, and there's really 4 of them from the presentation today. First of all, just a reminder that the fiscal year 2023 year-end audit was completed and submitted to the North Carolina Local Government Commission on November 6th, which was on time and on schedule. Our external auditors from Cherry Becker presented the fiscal year 2023 year-end audit, as I mentioned, to the Joint Committee meeting of this committee and the Policy, Finance, and HR Committee back in November. And then after that, they went on and presented the full report or the report to the full city council on December 12th, 2023. As a reminder, the audit opinion issued by Cherry Beckert was unmodified or clean, which is the highest level of assurance that they can provide. And then finally, and I'll talk a little bit more about this on a subsequent slide, Cherry Beckert did identify two findings, if you all recall, from the audit, and staff has developed corrective action plans for both of those and submitted those plans to the LGC. And that's a requirement that the LGC has, that we submit something to them. That has been done, and I'll show you all that here on a subsequent slide as well. So you can go on to the next slide, Alicia. So just a quick reminder for primarily for folks who may be watching us, the committee members I'm sure are aware of this, but why have an external audit? And there are a couple reasons for that. First of all, it's required by state statute. State General Statute 159-34 requires that each local government shall have its accounts audited as soon as possible at the close of each fiscal year by a certified public accountant or by an accountant certified by the local government commission as qualified to audit local government accounts. Our auditor here this year was Cherry Beckert, shall be selected and report directly to the governing board. A second reason that we have to have an audit is the federal government requires what's called a single audit from all recipients who expend more than $750,000 in federal financial assistance within a given fiscal year. And we, as a recipient of federal government funding, exceeded that $750,000 threshold. So that's, again, another requirement that leads to us having to have an audit done each year. And then in addition to that, it really is a best practice. I mean, it provides transparency and assurance to the debt rating agencies. It also provides assurance to the public and to the community that we are using tax dollars wisely and efficiently as well. And then the last thing I'll highlight is the importance of that independent review, having that external auditor come in and look at your results and your policies and procedures each year. And one of the things we do here at the City of Asheville to kind of enhance that is that we rotate our audit firms every 5 years. And so this was actually the first year that we've been with Cherry Beckert. We had been with our previous firm for 5 years. So we did an RFP last year around this time and selected a new firm. And so again, that's just one of the things we do, kind of an extra step we take to make sure that we maintain that independent review that's so important. Next slide, Alicia. Okay, just a quick recap of the fiscal 2023 audit results. That first bullet point lists the different types of opinions that auditors can issue of the financial statements. And as I mentioned, we once again here at the City of Asheville received the unmodified or clean opinion, which is the highest level of assurance. The materials from the fiscal year 2023 audit were provided to this committee back in November and then to the full council in December. And those materials included the slides that Cherry Beckert presented to this committee, also what's called the representation letter, which is a real detailed summary of some of the key components of the audit. And it highlights things such as the fact that there was no fraud found, there were no illegal acts or violations of laws or regulations that were noted by the auditors. And then finally, if you really want to dive deep into the city's finances, there's the fiscal 22-23 annual comprehensive financial report. Acronym for that is ACFR. And that really provides a complete overview of the city's financial position. It's a 100, maybe even a 200 page plus document. It's out on our website. I think we have at least 10 years worth of those documents out there. So if anyone's interested in learning all about the City of Asheville's finances, please feel free to dive into those at some point. So Alicia, you can go to the next slide. Again, just kind of a quick recap. I mentioned those two findings that Cherry Beckert talked to you all about. One related to the recognition of revenue that was previously reported as unearned revenue in the grants fund. And the second related to the removal of a lease receivable and deferred inflow balance related to the Harris Cherokee Center Fund. As I mentioned earlier, the city agrees with those findings. We developed corrective action plans, which are included in the ACFR on page 204. They're also outlined in the letter that we submitted to the Local Government Commission, which was included with the materials that were posted on your website. So hopefully you all got that and had a chance to look at it. The LGC does require that all local governments who receive findings in their audits submit that written response letter to them within 60 days of the audit presentation, and we've met that requirement. The letter was signed by all council members on January 9th, and we uploaded it to the LGC website on January 10th. So that was roughly 30 days or so after the audit was presented to City Council back in December. Next slide. Okay, so I think at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Becky Ogles, our Assistant Finance Director, and let her talk a little bit about the planning that we're already doing for the upcoming fiscal 2024 audit.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, so we have already started working on 2024. It seems like we just wrapped up the other one, but just kind of wanted to go over a couple of things that we're working on. So we are continually doing our monthly, quarterly reconciliation of our balance sheet accounts. This is to make sure that they are accurate at year end, catching anything that might come up throughout the year. One thing I'm working with our accounting manager on is to do a checklist so that hopefully some of these findings that we have had the last couple of years, we can kind of catch on the front end. So we're working to develop some checklists by fund. Unfortunately, we have a lot of funds and each of them are just a little bit different as to what we need to do at year end. So we thought per fund would be the best option for those. Tony and I will also be reviewing our general ledger mapping. Since Terry Beckert drafts our financial statements, we have to get them the mapping. And I think just throughout the years, things have just shifted a little bit. So we were going to do a thorough review of that just to make sure that everything is being reported accurately and in the correct place. And then, with last year being Cherry Beckert's first year, they provided a PBC list or provided by client list, but it was kind of a work in progress because they were new. So what they have asked me to do is kind of go through the one we used last year and kind of change some names, update some things so that hopefully this year will be a little bit of a smoother process. So I am working on that. And then, so as you guys know, our year end ends June 30th. We do a hard close of our books, normally the middle of August. This gives us enough time to really make sure we have as many journal entries, everything entered before we close our books. And we as a finance department send out reminders to the staff as to when certain things are due. So that is the other thing that we'll be working on. I collaborate with the other divisions to send that out. We actually send it out, it sounds crazy, but the beginning of April, because for purchasing, for some of their items, we need to make sure that they get it done starting like cleanup and everything as early as May. So we like to give people about a month in advance notice of when those deadlines will come up. So that's kind of what we're working on right now. And I'll pass it back to Tony.
Thank you, Becky. And we can go to the next slide, which I think is the key takeaways. Again, I won't read through these a second time, but we'll go to the next slide, which I think is the point where we ask you all if you have any questions about what we've shared today.
Yeah, one question to start us off. Is this the first year that the city will have to prepare the financial statements independently for the first time? Do I remember that correctly?
So no.
Okay.
So our external auditors can still do it.
Okay.
The way we have our contract with Cherry Beckert is the people who draft it is actually a different group than the people who actually audit us. So
okay.
They have actually two different teams. But I will say, this is, I think, year 6 or 7 of me doing this for the city. And it has always been a goal for us to bring that in-house.
Yeah.
But it's It's a pretty large undertaking. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, with turnover, that hasn't happened. So I would like to bring it in-house probably within the next couple of years. But no, we will have them they will
Okay.
draft the 2024 financial statements.
Yep. Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I don't have any other questions. Does anyone else? Any other committee members?
I do. I'm just trying to understand. You said that the group that will prepare the financial statement by Cherry Belcourt, it's a separate division, but it's still the same company.
Yes, it is the same company, but it's a separate division. So the people who actually do the auditing are not the people who draft the financial statements. It's two different divisions or two different groups, and that is allowed by the LGC.
So they're auditing themselves.
So no. So all the drafting of the financial statements is basically putting the document together for us. I do a thorough review of it, as well as other people on their team as well. But basically all the drafting is taking our final numbers after they have been audited by this other group and preparing the document.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Anything else?
I have a question. Has Cherry Beckard provided any information about what their fee adjustment would be if we did actually bring the preparation of the financials in-house?
Yes, I believe it is written in our contract. And Debbie, I'm not remembering actual dollar values, so excuse me. But yes, I did make sure that they knew it was almost like an additional fee that they charged, so that when we feel like we are able to do them in-house, that fee would just go away.
Okay, thanks.
All right, last call. Okay, I think we can move on to the next item in the agenda then, which is also with Tony, a city internal audit program update with Tony, Tim Leitz, and Corrine Bennett from Jefferson Wells.
All right. Well, thank you, Nate. And thanks y'all for the questions on that first agenda item. Great questions there at the end. Like Nate said, I'm going to kick this presentation off as well. I'm going to hand it off to Tim and Corrine about halfway through, but I did want to kind of start things off, and we'll have Jefferson Wells introduce themselves, and then come back to me. I'll have a few finishing slides, and then we'll take questions from you all. So we can go to the next slide. So key takeaways, and you all may notice that we use these slides very regularly here at the city. It's one of the things that Ms. Campbell asked of us as staff, and it's a great thing because we want to make sure that the things that are the key points of the presentation, we share them at the beginning, we share them at the end, while we have everyone's attention. And if you doze off during the middle, you don't miss the key stuff. So it's a great way of going about presentations. So key takeaways from this presentation. So and you all know this, those of you all who've been on the committee for a while, we have had some continuing recruitment challenges ourselves, and also within the internal audit field itself, in terms of finding qualified staff to work as our internal auditor here at the city. It's been a couple of years since our last internal auditor left. And so what we've decided to do, and we've talked a little bit about this with you all in the past, is to pursue what we call a co-sourced model for internal audit services. And what that means is we're going to use a blend of resources within the organization, and I'll talk a little bit about that, with a third-party service provider, that being Jefferson Wells, to actually conduct the audits for us. And so what we did was, back in the fall of 2023, we released a request for proposals, or an RFP, for those external audit services. And the contract was awarded to Jefferson Wells just last week at City Council's January 9th meeting. And then the final key takeaway from this, and again, this is something I'll talk a little bit more about at the end, is the city has restructured the internal audit internal auditor position into what we call an internal auditor program manager. And that will allow us to provide dedicated in-house staff to work with Jefferson Wells and also provide follow-up on any audit findings and recommendations that they provide us with. So next slide, please. So just a little bit on how we selected Jefferson Wells. So like I said, we released an RFP back in the fall. We received 9 RFP responses, so we were pleased that we received that number of responses. Those 9 were all reviewed by a team consisting of city staff and also the chair of this committee, Nate Hathaway. And after reviewing those RFPs, Jefferson Wells emerged as the highest scoring RFP responder. As I mentioned, then on January 9th, City Council approved a resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into a contract with Jefferson Wells. We set that up for a term of 1 year with 2 additional 1-year renewal options possible. For the first year of the contract, we have set that at a not to exceed amount of $115,000. We anticipate that will allow Jefferson Wells to perform up to 4 internal audits for us during that first year. And we're kind of counting calendar year 2024 as the first year. And then, of course, they will actually bill us based on actual cost, and those will be billed on a per hour basis. But the contract itself is for a not to exceed amount of $115,000. Next slide. Okay, so at this point, I think we're going to turn it over to Tim and Corrine, and I am going to share their presentation, their slides, if I can find these. Y'all give me just a moment. Okay, I think I'm there. Let me go into presentation mode with this, and then I will turn it over to Tim.
We good, Tony? Close?
Can you all see it?
Yes.
Okay. You can just tell me when to advance.
Thanks, Tony. And good afternoon, Chairman Hathaway and the fellow members of your audit committee there in Asheville. My name is Tim Leitz. I wear 2 hats for the firm of Jefferson Wells. I am the national practice leader for our firm across the nation for internal audit practice, but I'm also a regional director. I live in Raleigh, and my clients are throughout the Carolinas, both north and south. And Corrine and I are very thankful to have the opportunity to be your internal audit provider for the next year in 2024, and hopefully for years to come. So we look forward to getting to know all of you this afternoon and later in the year. We wanted to spend just a few minutes going through maybe a high-level overview of our firm, our internal audit practice, and then the team to serve you all going forward. So I have a colleague of mine, Corrine Bennett. She's also out of the Raleigh market. She and I were up in Asheville last week to meet in person with Tony, Becky, Holly, your CIO, Deborah, your city manager, and a few other people. So we already got started to get to know all of you, and very thankful to have the opportunity to get to know you this afternoon. So Corrine, maybe a brief introduction.
Thanks, Tim, and thank you all for welcoming us today. My name's Corrine Bennett, Customer Relationship Manager at Jefferson Wells, and I too am a North Carolina citizen over in Cary. And like a lot of you, I have been Big Four internal audit, finance, accounting, and tax. And so it's meaningful for me to be in a role where I help others who, like yourself, in internal audit need some support or services or resources. So I really enjoyed meeting the team last week, and I appreciate your customers, your public service to help create and support such a great town. Asheville's a wonderful place to be, and we're just honored to be part of the back office to help support you all.
Thank you, Corrine. A little bit more background on my end. I've been in internal audit. I'll just stop at 25 years. I've been a chief audit executive myself twice, most recently with LabCorp, Laboratory Corporation of America. It's a North Carolina-based Fortune 250 company based in Burlington, North Carolina. Many of you probably have heard of LabCorp in the past. While at LabCorp, I was actually a client of Jefferson Wells when I was running their audit department, and I came over to the Raleigh office about 13 years ago to run their internal audit practice here in the Raleigh office. So we've got people all throughout the Southeast that will support this engagement. The benefit actually of having a remote working environment is we can pull resources from across the nation to work on any of the audits for the city of Asheville, which is really nice. And we'll get into the team to serve you here in a few slides. We also, Corinne and I are very lucky, and I wanted to mention this too. We work with about 8 or 9 state of North Carolina entities here in Raleigh. I live right downtown. I'm about 8 blocks away from the Capitol building. I can walk to about 8 of the entities. Some of the larger ones we work with is DHHS, DOT, DOA, Department of Justice. Actually, we've worked for Josh Stein and his team providing internal audit services. At the community college system, DNCR, which is Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, all the state parks, the aquariums, the museums, things like that. And also DEQ is Department of Environmental Quality, along with Department of Public Safety, and ORR, which is the Office of Revenue Recovery. So I would say our familiarity with the government entities here in the state of North Carolina, we will definitely leverage that as we do some of the work for you in the coming year. Maybe next slide, Tony. It's going to take a while for it to kick in. I'll try to tell you to change a little bit sooner, right? It hasn't switched yet on the screen. I'm trying to click on it at my end, and obviously that's not working. So what we wanted to do is give you a little bit of an overview of Jefferson Wells, very high level. And some of these slides, we'll get to them, but I can speak to them because I know them pretty well. Jefferson Wells has been owned by a Fortune 250 company out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, called Manpower. Many of you have probably heard of that name. We are the professional services arm of Manpower Group out of Milwaukee. They have owned us since the year 2000 and just basically let us run independently as a professional services firm. So for 23 years, we have been owned by them, and we enjoy the financial support, obviously, of a $22 billion company that does business in 80 countries around the world today. I think that, there we go. It's back, Tony. I can see it well on this end. Hopefully everyone else can as well.
Yeah, sorry, y'all. I was trying to do that and it wasn't working for whatever reason. And so Alicia has taken it back over, which is probably how we should have started this in the first place. Sorry about that, y'all.
That is fine. I think one of the things Corinne and I are really very proud of every year, and my colleagues, is we have won one of the world's most ethical company award. It's put out every year by Ethisphere. We're a 14-time winner of that, 14 years in a row. We just won it in 23, and hopefully we keep the streak going into 24. So we're very proud of that award. It is very hard to attain that award, let alone attain it multiple years in a row like we have. Maybe next slide, Tony. We got into a little bit of this. Our firm started in the mid-90s. We were in business for about 4 or 5 years in the Milwaukee, Chicago area. We're a Midwest-based firm initially until we were purchased by Manpower Group. So 25 years in business. We have 3 main practice areas, which we will talk about. But really the key differentiator that Corinne and I enjoy when we come to start working with clients is we do not hire any people off college campuses. Not that that's bad. When I was at Ernst & Young, I loved hiring off college campuses. It's great working with the younger people. But our firm has set a minimum of 7 to 8 years of professional experience before they join Jefferson Wells. So what that enables us to do is bring a very experienced person to your team. Our team in the Carolinas actually average over 18 years of experience. We show 15 years there nationally for all of our Jefferson Wells consultants across the nation. But I would say in our Carolinas group, you're going to get some people who are very seasoned, many years of internal audit experience, both in public accounting, but also in industry. We pull from very large internal audit departments in the Southeast as well and across the firm. Maybe next slide. Quickly, you really don't need to hone in on all of this. Obviously, tax is probably not a high priority for the city, and finance and accounting. Those are two practices that are sister practices of ours, that we do have capabilities in those areas. And one thing to note about Jefferson Wells, unlike Cherry Beckert, and by the way, we know the Cherry Beckert team very well here in Raleigh. I know many of them personally, so I'm glad to see that they are your external auditor this year. And they are the ones that perform the risk assessment for you all on the internal audit side, and that we leveraged. Corinne and I leveraged that work that they did to build some of the potential audit plans that we'll be looking at here in the near future. But my practice is at the top. It's the first practice Jefferson Wells had. It's the internal audit practice. We call it risk and compliance. We do internal auditing there and a variety of different things. SOX work, which is internal control testing for the state of North Carolina. Actually, it's called EAGLE testing. Some of you may be aware of that. So we do EAGLE testing as well for some of the large state entities here in North Carolina. The next slide is really kind of what we want to hone in on. This is my practice and the capabilities we will be bringing as a team really to the table for you all as an internal audit function. Outside of that middle column in the middle there, the blue one, that's financial services work that we do specifically with financial institutions, such as banks, investment companies, or insurance companies. We will not be leveraging any of those services for you all. But we do on the far left there, and the green and the orange columns will be primarily the ones we will be focused on there for you all. So our internal audit services that we can provide. Kareem wanted me to make sure that I mentioned we also do have deep fraud investigative expertise. That is not listed there, but we do a lot of fraud investigative work for the state as well as other clients, as well as grant compliance. We don't have both of those bullets listed there, but we have a deep grant compliance team and expertise as well in-house. Moving over to the far right, the red column is enterprise risk management. That is our capability for clients. That work has already been done, though, by Cherry Beckert and their team. They've gone through and done a pretty thorough risk assessment that we've seen, which really will point us to the higher risk areas. I think you all have seen the results of that study in the past. So we were going to leverage all of our internal audit work for 2024 off of that study. And we will also be discussing current risk, maybe emerging risks that have presented themselves since the Cherry Beckert study was done with your lead executives in the area. We are going to do an audit. So we'll be building all of our audits off of a risk-based plan. At far right, probably not anything interested immediately today, but we do have the capability of doing construction audit services as well. I was telling Becky and Tony last week, we did Mission Hospital's Cancer Center, something right there in your backyard recently. So when that was built, our audit team worked side by side with them to review that whole construction process from start to finish. So we do have the ability to assist the city if ever needed, if there's a very large construction project, generally $10 to $15 million in size or larger, is when it's beneficial to consider bringing us in. Any questions here before I move on? I know kind of keeping a nice pace, Chairman Hathaway, but if anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Okay, maybe next slide, Tony. We're almost done. Okay. We do have our own internal audit methodology. It's very straightforward. You can follow the whole diagram starting from the top. We're building everything off of risk assessments and really driving our audits toward the highest risk areas facing the city today. We do a lot of upfront planning and discussions back and forth to be in a nice collaborative manner before we start an audit to make sure we're all on the same page. We execute it, we issue an audit report, and anything that goes in that audit report, we have thoroughly discussed with the process owners or the lead executives before we have any kind of a written finding. We will not, work in a vacuum and not tell anyone what we're doing until the last day when we have a report and, we issue it blindly and people don't know anything that's going to be in it before it's issued. So that is not the way we operate at all. So we're very collaborative from day one. If there's any follow-up issues coming out of those reports, generally, if we have an issue or a finding or a suggested improvement, we'll work with a person to be responsible to complete that change or implement the recommendation and have a target date set. That will be in the report, actually. We will then follow up to make sure those dates were hit. We will report back as needed to Tony, to Becky, to the audit committee, to the city council. Whoever needs an update from us, we're happy to do that at any time. Okay. Next slide, Tony. It's a little more detailed about how we will execute from start to finish each audit. Tony mentioned we have 4 projects teed up this year for you all. That is flexible, it's fluid, and certainly we have time to insert things on the back half of the year, even the first half of the year. If there's an emerging need, we certainly can slot some projects in. But this is really how we're going to go about doing an audit project for you all, start to finish. Very straightforward, very similar to what I talked about on the previous slide. And probably the best slide in the next one, Tony, I believe this is some of the benefits, right? So some of you may ask him, why would we have an internal audit department? Because we have the external auditors, Cherry Becker, right? So the external auditors that work very closely with Becky and Tony to compile your annual financial statements, right? So their focus is heavily on making sure the financial statements are compiled properly, accurately, completely, and in accordance with all the accounting standards, right? They don't necessarily always look at operational efficiencies or operational controls. Are they adhering to process or the policies and procedures and things like that? They are focused heavily just on the numbers to make sure that everything is reflected accurately, okay? Internal audit department comes in and does look at the full spectrum, consider us as really your eyes and ears as an audit committee. City council, we're happy to be the eyes and ears for the city council, and Tony and Becky certainly. But even the lead executives, we met Holly last week, and we certainly want to be a partner with Holly to make sure that the things in IT are running as intended as she thinks they are. But we're going to give her a very transparent assurance to look at the high risk areas in her area of responsibility as an example, and give a nice report back there. I would say also best practice, certainly all the larger municipalities within the state of North Carolina, the large cities all have internal audit functions. I know Corinne and I know the Raleigh City internal auditor, Martin Pretherbridge, really well, known Martin for years. So all the bigger cities do have an internal audit function. So it's really a best practice to have one in place. Next slide.
Tim, one thing you had frozen up during that when you were talking about our independence. So all of our work done for the city of Asheville, we're not limited by being opining or attesting on your financial statements.
Yeah, I believe it was Sandra who asked a very good question earlier about Cherry Becker, right? So they're auditing themselves. That is a very good question because that led to, if many of you know the history of Enron many years ago, that really led to that whole debacle is because they were kind of auditing themselves. The beauty of Jefferson Wells, we don't do any attestation work on financial statements. So we don't do what Cherry Becker does for you all now on the financial statement side. We don't do any of the opinions. We don't issue opinions like that. All of our work is solely advisory. So we are working solely on the advisory piece, which makes it nice. We don't have any independence issues. So Sandra doesn't have to worry about that. Okay. This is really the key slide, Tony and Becky and the audit committee that I wanted to mention today. It's a nice snapshot of probably more than likely the audits that we do. And there could be some specialists that we bring in and out will be compiled by this team. So I'll be the lead person on the team. Ruth Thomas, who's out of Charlotte. She's been a member of my team engagement manager. She's worked for Jefferson Wells for over 15 years. Very talented person on my team. I'm so excited to have her as a member of the team. And then if anything goes into the IT arena, if we do any kind of IT audits, Sonica Modi is a member of my team as an IT engagement manager, a very deep expertise in IT security and IT audit and all things IT related. And then the next layer down, we're a very flat firm, which is good too. You don't have 10 or 15 different layers within a typical accounting firm. We only have 3. So it's director, manager, and professional. So, and the professionals you get are very experienced. Virginia's been with us for 15 years, internal auditor. She's done many projects for the state of North Carolina, internal audit functions and investigations and things like that. Sandy Smith, she used to work with me at Ernst & Young. She also has been with the firm for over 15 years. And then lastly, Cynthia, very talented, seasoned IT auditor. She's been working on a couple of state agencies right now over the last 12 to 18 months and knows the government space really well there. If needed, we also have some of my colleagues in the director position or national practice leader position. Stephen Head, he runs our cyber risk COE, which is our center of expertise. Stephen luckily lives in Charlotte. He actually used to work for me before he got promoted up, and he is now our national practice leader in cyber risk. Great guy if you ever need to lean on him for advice in the IT arena. Happy to have him involved in any of our audits. And then Jim Hedgeka, he runs our business optimization practice, center of expertise, anything related to data analytics, which we probably will leverage for our audits. He also does AI, robotic process automation, and some specialties around system implementations. If we ever need Jim and his team, we certainly can lean on him as well. Any questions? This is really the key slide. So we wanted to make sure you got to see at least the horsepower you're getting here by partnering with us. Any questions about any of the slides, but specifically this one? Yes, go ahead, Debbie.
How much time, if any, do you plan to spend on site?
As much as needed. That's a great question. We have people that can easily be close there and be on site. We also have learned over the last, as you can imagine, the last 4 years since the pandemic hit, we're very efficient as well to do audits remotely via Teams and like the presentation today, right? So whatever works best for the city of Asheville, I would imagine at times. I certainly will be on site a lot, and I can see Ruth being there too because she's so close. We want to build relationships with Tony, Becky, your team, with Deborah, with Holly, and other executives within the city. We certainly want to get to know them. They need to get to know us. And then once we build up that nice familiarity with each other and some trust, maybe we do a little bit more remotely. But we're trying to save as much travel costs and expenses and keep the budget as lean as possible for this. So we are going to try to do as much as we can through automation and virtual, okay?
Thank you.
And we can adjust as needed, certainly. We're flexible. Good question.
Yeah, Tim, a question from me on the risk assessment. You've referenced Cherry Becker's risk assessment several times. Just curious, the quality of it, is it consistent with what you would have expected? Are the findings consistent with what you see at other municipalities?
Absolutely. Chairman Hathaway, that's a very good question. We spent a lot of time evaluating their work. And again, I mentioned earlier, I know them. I know the quality of their team, have a high level of respect for them as a firm. I would say most of the results that came out were pretty typical from what I would typically see out of my clients, except for one area. And this is one area that we have already discussed with Holly last week, the head of your IT area there. Typically, we see some of the biggest risks to any organization. When I was at LabCorp, the number one risk to LabCorp was data security or IT related, right? We will be looking very closely at Holly's internal IT risk assessment results, as well as maybe some of our input, just to make sure that we are not missing any of the key risks. I did not see as many high-level IT risks out of Cherry Becker's work that I typically would, and maybe there's some good reasons there. But before we even jump to any conclusions there, we're going to certainly work closer with Holly and make sure we have IT really, truly buttoned up and evaluated, okay? Everything else, they did a fantastic job, and I'm not really knocking their results in the IT arena. I think we saw a little bit less of a focus on high-risk areas in IT, where we typically, a lot of organizations have higher risk in that area. Good question.
You may have already touched on this a little bit in your answer to Nate. You were talking about a potential 3 to 4 audits that you'll run through this year. Can you kind of broadly address where you think you're going to begin your work and what all you'll touch on?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Tony, I don't think the slide is included in there.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we can move to the next slide. I know
next slide.
We kind of answer maybe Andrew's question.
Absolutely.
Here or in the slide, the first slide when I jump back in. But to answer your question directly, we think we have a pretty good idea of what those 4 areas are going to be. We still need to do some finalization of that. with city staff and some communication internally so that we can, make sure department directors are on board, make sure they know what's coming in terms of, the time commitment to these audits. And so what we want to do is finalize that over the next 4 weeks-ish, get Jefferson Wells started on the first audits, and then report back to you all at your April meeting, kind of what those areas are going to be, and then specifically, hopefully have some initial reporting back on the first audit or two that Jefferson Wells has gotten underway with. So that's kind of our next steps timeline for getting started on that. But there will be, and I think maybe this is what I can draw from this slide. In developing those internal audit projects, we're going to use the risk assessment, and Tim's already kind of talked a little bit about that. And then there's also some areas that we've kind of identified as city management that there's some pretty high priorities as well. And so it's really going to be those two inputs that are driving the internal work plan, not only I would say for this year, but I would say for the second year as well.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah, go ahead.
Andrew, yeah, that's a great question, Andrew, and I'm glad you asked that. We've had very transparent communications. Tony and Becky actually asked us about 4 or 5 weeks ago to come up, look at the Cherry Beckett results and come up with maybe the top audits you feel would be the most beneficial based on their risk assessment results. So we looked obviously at the high risk areas. There were many, I think there were 14, if I remember right, Tony, 14 very high risk areas that came out of it. And then there was a next tier down of higher risk areas as well. And we considered all of those and came up with a suggested plan that has been penciled in. We had discussions with Tony and Becky and Deborah and Holly last week. So we've kind of penciled some things in, but we certainly want to solidify those as Tony had mentioned. Yes, Chairman Hathaway.
Yeah. One other question is just, for audits, how reasonable does that seem compared to other municipalities in terms of the number that actually the audit work going on?
Yeah, that's another great question. I think my answer to that is, if you take the amount of high risks that are sitting out there for the city of Asheville, the coverage we're going to suggest that we perform this year for you all, and then you can have a balancing act. It's like, well, it's going to take us, maybe 2 to 3 or 4 years to get through the high risk areas, and then that would be sufficient. If you wanted to go a little bit faster, we're going to have to do more audits and have a little bit more budget, or do more audits with less intensity where we're not spending as much time. So it's a balancing act between the amount of hours we have to spend. We've estimated approximately, a 4 to 5 week audit period per project, which is a very nice size audit. We can get a lot accomplished in that time frame and cover a lot of ground. And that's kind of where we're at. Our target, we worked with Tony and Becky about an estimated budget amount for this year, what would be allotted for a budget or amount of dollars you want to spend in a year. And that's what we kind of work towards. Okay.
Yep. Thanks.
Sure. Now, just to add one more quick thing to that, and it's actually the second bullet on this slide. One of the things we're looking at too, I don't know if you all are aware, but there is something called the Cease to Harm audit, which is underway through our Reparations Commission. A group called the Carter Group is looking at both city and county operations to determine if there are areas that need adjustment in terms of equity, to make sure that our policies and procedures are as equitable as we possibly can be. The results of that audit are expected in the next 30 to 60 days. And what we want to be able to do is make sure that we coordinate the results of that with Tim and his team. And so if there are things that come out of the Cease to Harm audit that we would like the Jefferson Wells team to follow up on or work on, we want to make sure we incorporate that into the audit plan as well.
Debbie, yes.
I should, but I don't recall the 14 various risk areas that were in the Cherry Beckett report. Does it seem like you will be focusing more on compliance versus security? You mentioned IT risk. I mean, where do you see your focus without getting into the details, which
yeah. That's a great question, Debbie. I don't have the actual results open. I can get back to you with that, and I'm happy to give you more information on the things we considered. We did put a presentation deck together for Tony and Becky with all of that information in there that we did analyze and assess. But there is a wide variety of, there's some grant compliance things in there. I think there's procurement, there's some fleet, there's some IT, there's revenue through your Harris Center. There's a variety of areas that we potentially could cover that we're starting to hone down, like Tony mentioned. It's like a funnel, right? We've put in a lot at the top and we're starting to narrow it down to the things that we will actually cover this year for you all.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Andrew, yes.
Hey, so the cease the harm audit that Tony mentioned, in my understanding, that's mostly kind of about equity and outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my thought is, well, it's great. And if we can leverage anything that we pick up out of that relates to the internal audit function, I'd be concerned if we had a focus with driving this spending into kind of furthering that project as opposed to picking up any risks that might have been missing from previous years without having somebody in this internal audit role. So I don't know if that's something you can talk to or if I'm just making a statement.
No, that's another very good point. And I think the things that Tony and Becky and Deborah had pointed out when we met with them last week is just to make sure there's not a lot of overlap, right? We don't want any overlap, try to do anything that this study has done, but we also want to learn from the results and the recommendations that this Carter organization has for the city. We want to learn from that as an internal audit function to make sure that we're in sync and in collaboration going forward. Deborah.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I want to just clarify in terms of the objectives here. The cease to harm audit, and as Tony noted, is both for city and county, and it actually is looking at policies, procedures, programs, and I believe that there is a lot of opportunity and possible overlap in the work that this group, the internal audit, is doing for us to ensure that we are not continuing any practices that may be doing a particular part of our community harm in terms of any of our practices, procedures, or policies or programs.
Deborah, thank you so much for clarifying that. I probably misspoke and said we don't want overlap. We don't want to do the same work that the Carter Group did for the city, but certainly, as you mentioned, we want to take lessons learned. And if there are opportunities that they are going to point out potentially in their final report that we can leverage and make sure that we start following up on or focusing on in our internal audit projects going forward, we certainly want to learn from what they provide as far as recommendations to the city and leverage that. Thank you, Deborah. Any other questions about this? You can see our next steps as a team. We already have started to meet people. Last week we were there in person, and we look forward to meeting more people in the near future. It's certainly a very nice benefit to get to meet you all so quickly after we got started. So this audit committee meeting timing is perfect for us. Thank you for the time today. Yeah, Andrew.
Hey, so kind of one more for both you and Tony. With the budget on this of a not to exceed 115K, do you have kind of a general amount that you expect as your per hour billing? I know travel and any extraneous expenses aren't going to be included in that, but just for, say, the staff's time, kind of what should we expect in terms of dollars per hour?
Yeah, a great question. We've provided that information to Tony and Becky already, and we estimated approximately about $25,000 per audit, and that's kind of saying they're going to be equal scope. We certainly can increase the scope or decrease the scope as needed for these projects to make sure that we're being very efficient. We've estimated the dollars to be about $100,000-ish for the 4 audits. And then if we do want to do a little bit more IT maybe risk assessment, but we're not going to do it if Holly's already done it. That may cost a little bit more getting us to that 115. I don't remember the actual dollar amount per staff member. I'd have to go back and look at that. I don't know if Tony or Becky or Kareen has it. I don't have it right in front of me. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say I don't have it in front of me either.
I don't want to mistake or misstate it, Andrew, but we certainly can get that to you. And Tony and Becky already have that info in their hands.
Okay. And then I guess my question for Tony is the audit program manager, is that roughly at the old budget that we had for the internal auditor, or plus minus a little bit?
In terms of salary, yeah, it's going to be very similar to what that position was making.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Debbie, I see you have a question.
Yeah, I want to follow up on the internal resource. Is that a full-time position devoted to this, or are we just tagging on to somebody's existing job?
It is a full-time position. In fact, actually, that might be a good segue. Tim will still be here. We can ask him more questions, but if we want to, and I'm sorry, y'all, we got to switch back and forth in presentations, but we can actually go back to the city's presentation, Alicia, if you can, and because that was going to be the next place I went, Debbie, was to kind of talk about what the structure looks like internally. So I'll give Alicia just a moment here to switch out the presentation. So okay, so the city staffing overview. So like I indicated at the start, we restructured the internal audit position into what we're calling an internal audit program manager to work along with Jefferson Wells and kind of be the people on the ground, the feet on the ground to make the program work. That internal audit program manager is going to report to the strategic services manager here in finance. And you all haven't met Frank McGowan, who is our strategic services manager. He could not be with us today, but the new position is going to report to him. Then we're going to have what I would call a dotted line reporting relationship to the city manager's office. Because I think, as you all know, that on internal audit matters, it's very important that there's a independence maintained, a separation from the finance department. And so even though both the employees, the program manager and the strategic services manager are going to be housed in the finance department, they're also going to have that regular connection and that dotted line reporting relationship to the city manager's office, either to Deborah or to one of our assistant city managers on both internal audit, the contract internal audit work that Jefferson Wells is going to be doing, as well as on the ethics hotline, which we're going to talk a little bit about in our next agenda item. We advertised for that position already. We decided to advertise internally only initially, and it turned out to be a very successful recruitment. We actually had 11 city employees that applied for this position. And one of the reasons we advertised it internally is we really wanted to get someone who was already within the organization, who had existing knowledge of the organization, the culture, the staffing, because we really wanted to have someone who could kind of hit the ground running and really be that connective tissue between Jefferson Wells and the city. And like I said, we were very pleased with the number of applications. We have actually made an offer and someone has accepted the position. I can't give you the names yet today because we're still, we actually just had her accept yesterday, and we're still communicating that throughout the organization, but we will be announcing shortly, hopefully next week, and we'll make sure you all get this announcement as well, the name of the internal audit program manager. And we are very pleased with the person who has accepted this job. Excited about having her on board. Think she'll be a great fit for this position. So Debbie, question? And so yes, it is a full-time position. There'll be full-time devoted to the internal audit work, being the liaison, as I said, and then also managing the ethics hotline complaints as well.
Tony, does this person have any experience in audit?
So this person has a background in finance. They actually were previously a part of the finance department, and they've been with the city for approximately 7 years, I believe. They worked in the finance department in the budget division for a while. Then they have been working in another department in the city for the past couple of years. And so they are not, they don't have direct internal audit experience, which again is something we found very hard to recruit for, which is one of the reasons we made this change to the position. But I'm confident that with their finance and budget background and business background, that they'll make a good fit for this job.
One more question, Tony.
Yeah, sure.
The independence you spoke of, critical. And since this person will be involved in the ethics hotline and directly reports to the finance director, it would be nice, since you do have an audit committee, for that individual to know that if there are any issues that they don't feel comfortable taking to the strategic services manager or even to the city manager's office, depending on the type of issue they run into, that they know that they have access to the audit committee. I think that's important.
Gotcha. And I think, I think one of the things that I think that the way we've structured the monitoring of the ethics hotline since our internal auditor left, currently, myself, Ms. Campbell, and Rachel Wood, one of our assistant city managers, we all three receive the complaints as they come in. And so I think that's beneficial, because if there is something that relates to the finance department, or if there is something that relates to the city manager's office, there's that other set of eyes. Now, I think what would happen likely, let's say, for example, if there was a complaint directly related to the city manager's office, internally that would be handled by consulting with our city attorney's office and with our human resources department prior to us reaching out to this particular committee or any external resources.
Well, I guess I understand what you're saying. Not all cities have an audit department, but the city of Asheville does. And since you do, I would like to know that the person knows that we are available in an instance where they're not sure where to go or not comfortable with the existing structure. We are not, we are a committee of the city, and so I don't view us as external, but we do not have any direct relationship with any of the departments. So I would just like to know that this person is familiar with us and gets to know us as a pathway to discuss issues if they feel it's important.
Gotcha. Understood. Andrew, I'll just see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on Debbie, because with the new position, I'm wondering, the previous internal auditor, who does that person report to? Who did the person reported to?
Yeah, so our previous internal auditor reported to one of our assistant city managers.
Assistants. And this new person will be reporting to who?
She will report to our strategic services manager within the finance department, and then he reports to me. But again, like I'm saying, there will also be, there's going to be regular communications and a dotted line relationship set up to the city manager's office as well. So if there are things that those two employees need to discuss directly with the city manager's office, they certainly have that outlet.
Okay, and considering that this person is in-house, the issue of having relationship with people within the city, of course, is made. There's nothing wrong with with the promotion or the appointment of this person. I'm just looking at what Debbie was talking about, and that is the independence, to be sure that, hey, this is someone coming within the within the city, so they probably have it doesn't have to be personal relationship, but at least they know the people that they're going to be, watching and reporting on. That's just why I'm asking, who they will be reporting to so that they can maintain independence and not feel encumbered when they have to address issues. So, yeah, I think that the person should know that the audit committee is available, for their sake and for the city's sake. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Nate, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, just one quick comment on this. I mean, I think I wasn't on the committee at the time, but I think the old internal auditor, she was heavily involved in these committee meetings. Is that right to say?
She was, yes.
Yeah. And is the new one going to be involved in these committee meetings?
Yeah, I think that is our plan, is for this position, this person, and along with the strategic services manager and myself, Becky and I will always be here as resources as well. But I think moving forward, you all are more likely to be hearing from this person or her supervisor as opposed to me or Becky.
Yeah. To Debbie's point, I think it'll be helpful if she's attending the meetings and she gets to know, obviously, the individuals on the call, and I think it'll kind of help bridge that. I'm not sure what other options are available from an independence perspective, within a municipality in terms of who, this person could report to. That would be better than as described. I just don't have that knowledge to call upon, but as long as we're interacting with this individual, I personally myself feel a little more comfortable about it.
Yeah, and again, you all will definitely. She will be the direct contact and main presenter, if you will, of stuff moving forward to the audit committee for sure.
And Tony, you just said that it would either be this person, the program manager, or her manager. I guess my preference would be this person rather than the manager. And I would love to see always an agenda item where the internal auditor program manager would have an opportunity to let the audit committee know if there were any issues to be discussed. I would love that to be a standard agenda item if possible.
All right. And I look forward to introducing her to you all at the next meeting. So any other questions on this slide? I think we can, Alicia, I think we can go to the next slide, which I think is the wrap up. And again, these are the key takeaways. I won't read through these again. Happy to answer any more questions. I know Tim's still on the line. Corrine's still on the line as well. So any other questions related to the internal audit program? We're really excited about getting this started. Like I said, it's been a couple of years since the program has really been active. And so we are really excited about having Tim and Corrine and their team working with us and getting this program up and moving again.
Yeah, I don't have any other questions on this point. I think it's going to dovetail nicely into our next item on the ethics hotline, which we've already started talking about. Tony, you want to cover that one quickly, and then we can.
Yeah, and I will go through those slides really quickly because I know we're got a little bit of time left, but I want to make sure we have plenty of time for discussion. And so the final agenda item is the ethics hotline update. I think at our last meeting, not the joint meeting, but the one before that back in August, we talked a little bit about the hotline. And I think there were some questions from the committee about a potential report around the hotline and the usage of the hotline, which is a great idea. So just quickly, some basics about the hotline. So it is a tool for employees, residents, and visitors to report ethics concerns anonymously. Those reports can be submitted either online or via telephone. We started the hotline back in 2019, so it's been in place for about 4 to 5 years now. We use a third-party provider called Navex Global for that service. They intake the ethics report line. There's an online website which we then use to view those. Whenever a report is submitted via Navex, an email alert is sent to city staff. And as I mentioned, currently that goes to the city manager, one of our assistant city managers, and myself. And we determine next steps with those complaints. And any reports that involve city employees are then forwarded to the city's Human Resources Department, and they kind of investigate and determine next steps related to any of those types of complaints. So next slide. So just quickly, the ethics hotline usage from last calendar year. So this is not fiscal year, but it's calendar year 2023. There were a total of 17 cases that were submitted via the ethics hotline. 15, and there's anonymity, as I mentioned, around this process. And so it appeared, at least based on the context of the cases, that 15 of those 17 appeared to be submitted by non-city employees. And so we had a lot of usage by residents and visitors, and just the ethics hotline link is available on the city's website as well. So it's available both internally for staff via our internal intranet, but also the city's external website as well. And so that, I think, is one of the reasons that led to so many of the cases being submitted by non-city employees. As we look through those 17 cases, 12 of those 17 were really not ethics complaints that involved a follow-up. And I sent out with the materials for the meeting kind of an ethics hotline, frequently asked questions that our previous internal auditor had prepared. And I don't know if you all had a chance to read through that, but it kind of talks a little bit about cases that might be submitted that truly aren't ethics complaints, and that those typically won't be followed up on. So the vast majority of the 17 cases that we got in 2023 fell into that category. And they were things like canceled calls, or reports not related to the city organization, or something outside our jurisdiction, or just kind of general complaints that really weren't ethics violations. And so, again, once you kind of take those out of the mix, there really were kind of only left kind of 5 cases that truly involved some kind of potential ethics violations. And 4 of those cases were referred on to our Human Resources Department for further follow-up. And as you all probably know, personnel matters in the public sector are considered confidential. And so we can't really go into detail or really share any details about the resolution of those. But that doesn't necessarily mean there wasn't action taken. But again, so only 5 of the 17 involved ethics violations, and HR looked into 4 of those. So next slide. So just to kind of compare usage in 2023 to the previous 2 years, usage was up overall. There were only 8 cases in 2022 and 4 in 2021. So, but even though there were fewer cases in both of those years, actually a greater percentage of those reports in the prior years came from employees. And so there's greater usage of the greater percentage usage, at least anyway, from employees in those prior years. And so one thing we want to do now that we have this internal audit program manager position filled is do what I would call some marketing of the ethics hotline. It's been a few years since there's been information really shared with our employee base that this is out there and available as a resource. Fortunately, we actually just renewed our contract with NAVEX, and as a part of that renewal, they provided us with some additional materials to market the hotline with staff internally, and we're planning to kind of launch that in February. There's a couple of methods we're going to be using. There's some supervisor meetings that occur here at the city. We're going to go to those and talk about the hotline. We also have an internal website called One Asheville that employees look at a lot, and so we're going to post some information there, and we're going to use the internal audit program manager to kind of help with those communications. And then, as I mentioned, now that we have that position filled, we're going to move toward having that person transferring the responsibility for monitoring the complaints that come in from the city manager's office or from myself, the assistant city manager, and the city manager to this internal audit program manager. And then she will coordinate response with the city manager's office and human resources as needed. So next slide. I think that might actually be the last one. I know that was quick. Happy to take any questions on our hotline. Chairman Hathaway.
Yeah, I'll start off. So since the Jefferson Wells team is on the phone, I mean, we can't see we haven't seen the actual complaints. Is that something that your team has considered, Tim, from a risk assessment standpoint?
Not as of yet. We certainly have the ability to assist as needed. So keep that in the back of your mind. Tony and Becky and team, very familiar with ethics hotline. I had a similar hotline reporting to me when I was at LabCorp and my team. Very familiar working with HR and handling those and reporting up to the audit committee as needed. So we're here if needed on that, certainly.
Okay, so it's not a risk assessment procedure that you're just considering or taking a quick look at those submissions.
I would say it's probably a typical internal audit function that probably your manager, as Tony has described well, that maybe quarterly they do an analysis of what's come in and maybe report up something to the audit committee. That might be something to consider. But certainly the manager is going to be your point person. They're going to see what's coming in and out and how to address that.
Yeah, just thinking independent personnel actually looking at these things. But Tony,
Yes.
same question from an external audit standpoint. Is this something that Cherry Beckert took a look at in their audit last year?
No, they did not look at the ethics hotline. No.
Okay. Is there any? I mean, did they do a presentation, kind of when they're a planning presentation for their audit to the audit committee, or did they only present to the audit committee when they're done with their procedures?
You're talking about Cherry Beckert and the external audit?
Sorry, Cherry Beckert. Yep.
Yeah. So historically, I'm trying to remember back if there's ever been a time where our previous auditors came and did a presentation prior to the joint meeting. I can't remember there being a time. I know Becky had to leave the meeting. She might remember, but I mean, that's something we could certainly talk about. I mean, I think it would kind of be, Becky and I come to you all with status updates. We did that a couple times. We might be able to ask Cherry Beckert to also attend the meetings and kind of tag team those status updates with Becky and I as we go through the process.
Yeah, I don't necessarily see a need for them to attend, but I do think it would be helpful from my standpoint if the message was passed along to them to consider. I don't think it would be much work to consider the submissions that basically were posted over the course of the audit period, just as a risk assessment procedure. I guess that's where I'm going with this. Does that seem reasonable from your standpoint, Tony?
I guess maybe I'm still not quite following. So if you kind of give me an example of what you mean by what they would post, maybe that might help me.
Oh, yeah. So to clarify, I'm saying, all I'm saying is they could just take a look at what's been submitted. So you referenced 17 in 2023. So they would just take a look at what has been submitted just from a risk assessment standpoint as they're doing their audit procedures, just to make sure there isn't anything they should be aware of that would then influence the procedures they actually perform.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. We can look at that. I mean, again, we haven't historically done that. I think, trying to think through the possibilities there. I mean, I think either working with Cherry Beckert or with Jefferson Wells team, I think there's an opportunity there to have a third-party set of eyes looking at those on an annual basis as well to kind of, again, provide again another layer of independent review that could be part of this. Yes, I do think that's something we could do.
Yeah, and to just try and sum up, I think a lot of the comments from the committee members, I think it's just the benefit of having some third party take a look at those and just make sure there isn't anything of concern. We don't need a report. We don't need, at least from my standpoint, I don't think we need a report. We just want someone to put their eyes on it and consider it. And not a whole lot of effort needs to go into it other than, again, just reviewing the submissions. That's all we're getting at, I think.
Yeah, I hear you. And actually, I would probably lean toward incorporating that into the work that Jefferson Wells does as opposed to the Cherry Beckert group.
And we're happy to do that, Tony, as needed, certainly.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah, I was gonna kind of try to redirect Nate. I think that's really a matter for our internal audit and Tim's team to address, since it's unlikely whatever is going to be found is going to rise to the level of materiality that Cherry Beckert's concerned with. So it's really more properly for Tim's team.
Sorry, this is a slightly different question, but from an ongoing standpoint, Tony, this was a very helpful update from my standpoint. I mean, are we planning to do just a quarterly update? Are we doing an annual update? Is that up to the discretion of the new position that was just filled? I guess, what are you thinking?
I mean, I think we could provide an update as regularly as you all would like. I mean, the data's there, it's easy to pull. And so, I mean, I think we could do a quarterly update to this committee, especially since we now have staffing internally that can help Becky and I with some of that. Yeah, I think we can definitely provide a quarterly update to you all on the ethics hotline usage.
Okay, thank you.
There's no other questions. I think I'll pass it back to Chairman Hathaway and we can move forward. I don't know if there's another agenda item. I don't think there is. So
I don't think there is. Just a couple closing comments. First of all, thanks to the Jefferson Wells team for being here. I think the volume of questions and comments is reflective of everyone's excitement about the internal audit function actually being filled. And making sure that now that it is filled, we're comfortable with kind of the direction where things are going. So this has been extremely helpful. One other item I just wanted to point out, just as a kind of future topic of consideration, is just going to be related to the bylaws of the audit committee. We're required to review those, I believe, every 2 years formally. And so we're going to plan to put those on the agenda for the next meeting. And so we'll have a chance to review those ahead of the meeting and come with comments, questions, any revisions we might want to make. All right, any other questions, comments before we close the meeting? Okay, Alicia, do we have any public comments? Last I saw, the answer was no.
No, we do not.
Okay. All right. So with that, I think we can move to adjourn the meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
thanks.
Thank you.